Good afternoon. I'm
not Trish, I'm just interfering. I want to say that we have had one or two, including one memorable one from Lisa, deliveries in our 8 congresses on grant peer review. It has always seemed to me enormously fertile because you've got so many reviewers, you can actually get statistics. However, I have visited the NIH over 10 times to make the point that they should put things to this research. I was on a panel or task force for the National Science Foundation, and the idea of doing any research was utterly rejected on their research on their methods of doing peer review. So I'm thrilled that you are all here, that this has become now suddenly fashionable, and in particular that Richard Nakamura agreed to come here. I was standing on his chest at the time, but he agreed. So, good luck.
Okay, well, I think we ought to clap. Thanks. Thanks very much, Drummond. Actually, I was involved in an expert panel on peer review earlier this year for the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and they are doing a huge amount of research there. They have tons of data. I encourage them very strongly to submit to the next peer review congress, so let's hope they will. Anyway, without further ado, we'll carry on with the afternoon. Great, there's so many of you here. It's really wonderful to have such a great turnout at this stage in a conference. I think it says a lot. Without further ado, we have João, yes, we've been discussing pronunciation, Martins, and he's going to talk to us about geographic and gender bias in peer review of applications submitted to the Swiss National Science Foundation. Oh, I forgot to say I'm Trish Groves from the BMJ. Sorry. Over to you, thank you.
Hi. Before getting started, I just want to thank the organizers of this Congress. Also thank my colleagues, François Delavie, who should be here anytime soon, and Anne Jorstad for helping me with this project. And thank, of course, Professor Matthias Egger for pushing us to share some interesting internal data on peer review with you here today. So, let's start. My name is João Martins, as you heard, and I'm a data analyst at the Swiss National Science Foundation in Bern, Switzerland. The Swiss National Science Foundation, also known as SNSF or FNS or SNF, is the main public funder, the main public funder in Switzerland, supporting not only physical sciences and engineering, like the NSF, but also biomedical research, like the NIH, as well as social sciences and humanities, like no other. In terms of annual budget, in billions here, the SNSF is substantially smaller than the NIH or the NSF. However, of course, if we take into account the fact that the population of the US is 40 times larger than the Swiss, we get comparable per capita budgets. In terms of number of grants, currently the SNSF awards almost 900 new grants per year to bottom-up research projects to establish researchers. If you're not done with counting here, don't worry. If we account now for rejected grants, then we talk about nearly 1,900 grant applications per year. In other words, at the SNSF, success rates are about 50%. Welcome to Switzerland. But prior to decision on approval or rejection, the 1,900 grant applications result in about 6,000 external grant reviews, which means that each grant application gets, on average, 3 external independent reviews. So the first step of the evaluation of a grant application consists of asking external experts to give a general score or to the overall quality of a grant application. somewhere between poor, 1 here, and outstanding, 6. And as you can see here, over a period of 7 years, from 2009 to 2015, most of grant applications got high or excellent scores. Yet, we need to understand whether these scores actually are linked to quality, or whether are there any confounding effects, such as factors such as gender or source or geographic location of the reviewers or gender of the applicants. So let's start with the origin of the reviewers. If we look at the geographic origin of the experts, meaning whether the experts are based in Switzerland or abroad, we see that Swiss-based experts tend to be much harsher towards their Swiss colleagues applying for funding at the SNSF. Now, one thing you need to know is that typically 1 out of 3 reviews is done by applicant-proposed experts. And for these applicant-proposed experts, there's a surplus of reviews getting outstanding scores. No surprise, I suppose. Then we come to gender. If we look at the review scores of male and female applicants separately, then it seems that men get relatively more outstanding review scores than women, though the difference here is not so large as before. Interestingly, if we look at the gender of the reviewer, men also seem to be more generous than women when reviewing to the SNSF. But now we need to rule out any possible confounding factors that could also be explaining these differences. So we looked at other things as well. We looked, for instance, as we can see here, 1 on the left, that there was a significant drop in the mean scores if we plot these scores against the year of submission, which is probably due to harsher review guidelines or guidelines to reviewers. On your right hand, then we see that the age of the applicants is also a factor to take into account, because older applicants are performing better than younger ones. Then there's also factors such as academic discipline or the type of affiliation. As you can see on the left, mathematicians seem to be more generous than economists. There are differences between disciplines. And on the right side, you have the different types of Swiss universities. You have on top ETH, which has, on average, better scores than, for instance, the smaller Swiss universities of applied sciences. So these are also factors to take into account. Now, if you put everything together, I'm summarizing all the results here. I'm very bad at describing numbers, but we have here a summary of, first, we can see that the perceived average score difference between international and Swiss-based reviewers is somewhere between 11 and 12%. The adjusted effect, adjusting for all the other factors that we've seen, is about half, and the same goes for applicant versus SNSF proposed reviewers, where instead of 13 to 14% an adjusted effect, you have an adjusted effect of 6 to 8% only. And the same goes to male versus female applicants and male versus female reviewers. Here the adjusted effects are much more, actually. So these are the main results, and thanks to these results, actually, the SNSF no longer allows applicant-proposed reviewers since 2016, and international reviewers are preferred over national ones to minimize possible sources of conflicts of interests. And of course, the SNSF also has designed a number of favorable conditions supporting women and families. Yeah. If you're interested in the topic and you want to know more about gender bias, I hope you saw François' poster. If not, you can just talk to him. And then you have tomorrow, if you're interested to know more about the different factors influencing the overall scores, please go see Stéphanie's poster at Montreux tomorrow afternoon. And with that, I would just like to take the opportunity to invite you to follow SNSF's channel on science policy. And of course, thank you all for your attention. And I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, as usual, we have 10 minutes for questions, and if I was Drummond, I would say no speeches. I said it anyway. No, I was only looking in that direction. I'm not sure which of you was first.
Chris Page in Kansas City. So if you look at the literature regarding somebody who's submitting a manuscript for publication and they suggest a reviewer, certainly there's data to support the fact that reviewers suggested by the author are much more likely to recommend that a manuscript be accepted than not. And that's what you're finding here. But I think most people tend to believe that those reviewers may be more valid than a non-reviewer suggested, non-author suggested reviewer. Obviously, you've concluded, or it seems like you would have concluded based on your actions, that an applicant for a grant who's suggesting a reviewer, that person is more likely to give a poor review. But do you have reason to believe that?
Well, I'm not going to talk about beliefs here, but well, the results are the results we saw. We used to check for obvious conflicts of interests. And of course, there's a trade-off. If I'm proposing someone, I'm expecting this person to be more engaged in the work I'm doing, and if there are no obvious conflicts of interest, it might be a very good suggestion.
Yet the recommendation is, or the action is, to eliminate those people from reviewing grants, which may not be a positive move.
And I think this is more a strategic move to engage more the offices, the SNSF personnel, to look for these people.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Mullins, Washington University in St. Louis. Given that there are 3 official languages in Switzerland, do grant applications come in only one language, or a language of choice? Four languages. My mistake. Do grants come in all languages or just in one? And would that influence either the propensity to request a peer reviewer who speaks your language or your preferred language, or does that influence the reviews?
Yeah, especially for social sciences and humanities, some grants might come in German, but I think there's a general trend towards English. And if it's a grant in German, it could be in French as well, but then you also have France and Germany talking that language, so it shouldn't be such a big problem. But yeah, that's definitely a problem. There's a general movement towards English, and as a data analyst, it's a nightmare to have all these different languages, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa Barrow, and that was so interesting, and after seeing your funding rate, I think there's going to be a stampede of researchers moving to Switzerland, so I just want to warn you that that's going to happen. But I noticed that the changes that were made in response to your findings were to actually drive your scores towards the higher scores. And I'm just wondering why, because that actually might reduce variation in your scores, and some granting agencies you would think would want more variation to help differentiate between higher and lower, quote, quality grants. So I'm just wondering, I mean, maybe a lower score isn't necessarily bad, as I think the other reviewer was, or commenter was indicating.
Right. By taking or by moving towards international experts, we lose the Swiss criticism.
Yeah, and also the other change too would move you towards higher scores.
Now the other one, it would be the opposite direction.
Ah, okay, I misread that then. Okay.
Right. Yeah, it's a problem, right? A problem of resolution.
Yeah.
We have this problem when we try. Again in 2012 we changed, or 2010 we changed the guidelines specifically to address that. Yeah, it's not easy, especially if we get reviews from the United States of America. They tend to be very, very positive. But yeah, it's not an easy
Thank you. Another question here.
thing.
I'm going to make an argument for less resolution. These scores are different across countries. People have very different anchor points, and they're a filter between the actual decision, which is should this grant be funded or not. So have you ever thought about getting rid of the scores and having should this grant be funded, yes, no, maybe, which is the system we all use for journals?
Right. That's a good idea, I think. But the idea also behind this course is to look at different components. And I invite you to go tomorrow to this other poster session, because there, you have to look at different things. And at the end, you come up with an overall score. Now, I agree with you, but then we still have 3 external reviews per grant. So, and I don't know, I think people like it like that, but maybe it would be better to have a binary decision on that. It would be a different system, but maybe it's a good idea.
Okay, and another question?
Me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Seaver. I'm a researcher at PLOS. I was wondering about your linear model and how you chose which factors to include and to exclude. My guess is that age and gender are highly correlated, and so I'm wondering if taking out the age effect might be obscuring any gender effects.
Right. We also looked at interactions between the factors. Of course, we were interested in gender and these 4 factors mainly, and then we corrected for the remaining ones we had. Yeah, and then there are interactions which we also take into account, but differences are it didn't change the final results. So we showed the results as such, but it's a multivariable linear model, very simple. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, I have a question if nobody else does. This was all grants pulled together, so we can't see whether there were program grants or sort of young researcher tracks and all that kind of thing. But one question I thought was unresolved in your presentation was about age. It seemed to be that young researchers were somewhat discriminated against, and I didn't know if the funder was aiming to do anything about that.
Well, this is a program called project funding, which is the equivalent to the somewhat equivalent to the NIH R01, I suppose. So it's for established researchers, and yes, we do have a problem with age, and that's another study of ours and another concern. And we do also have then specific programs for helping young researchers achieving independence.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. Oh, another question. Oh, 2 more questions. Right, we've got 2 minutes.
Mine, I think, is just a clarification. Aileen 5 from St Andrews. I've just been following the Twitter stream, and I've been wondering whether you've banned reviewers who are named by applicants, or whether you've just stopped asking applicants to name reviewers, but there's still the possibility that your office staff might pick the same people that the authors would have picked. Because there's a difference, I think. I thought you said that you're not actually banning some people from reviewing, it's just you're not asking authors anymore for recommendations.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's correct.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Last word.
before you start a stampede to Switzerland to get money, you should be careful because the Swiss are very odd people. I got a grant from your agency about 30 years ago to do a study on Mont Blanc, the summit of, and filled a truck full of the necessary equipment, very heavy equipment, and after half an hour driving this truck towards the Alps, was arrested by the Swiss police for having too heavy a truck, and immediately couldn't get out of jail until I'd paid $1,000, and I still haven't got that back from your agency.
Well, I hope that money was invested into research.